Why, hello there, people of the internet. Welcome to kind of a documentary type of video. I don't know what you would call this, but this is why Ohio is not a battleground state anymore, slash, and future of Ohio. This is a special video because this is a state I've always wanted to talk about. And I finally have a great reason to talk about it. I have a series meant to talk about each state. So this is going to be one of the longest future of blank series. And today we're going to be taking a look at originally why Ohio was seen as such a big purple state and why those same factors influence it to not become a battleground state anymore. And of course there's like 5 elections that really show us what factors influence Ohio. Now again, I'm using elections for like 1960, and from that point on forward. I'm using 5 elections, but before 2016, to show you guys what I'm talking about. What are the major factors of Ohio that influences its politics? Now, before we start this documentary, smash a like button down below, subscribe, share with a friend, hit the little bell, and yes. So, this is 1960. Ohio, at the time, was a leaner state. At the time. But 1960 was the last election before Ohio became a pure purple state. And even then, for Ohio standards back then, this was a fairly close race. Now, Richard Nixon won around 7.5 points. Or 6.5 points. Whatever that number is. You get the point. Ohio was a likely Republican state in 1960. It voted like 0.1% right to the nation. However, Eisenhower won this state by 20%, and it voted like 10 points right to the nation. So it trended like 3-4 points left to this nation. Now, what is the main reason for the shift? And what is the big factor for 1960? You probably all know what is the biggest factor in 1960's election. Religion. This is a huge issue back then. I mean, 1950. This was roughly what the religion map looked like. You go to Ohio, right? This is 1950, by the way. This isn't like 1822. This is 1950. Very close to the election. Do you notice the red? These are, or pink, these are the Catholic counties. This is the same religion as JFK. And where did JFK do best in? The more Catholic-heavy counties. That's just a flat-out fact. And again, some of the Catholic counties he didn't win. But compared to the rest of the state, they were way closer than the Lutheran counties. I mean, look at this. Look it down in the Cincinnati area. It's a fairly Catholic area compared to the central part of the state, which I believe is Methodist. Look at that. It's barely going for Nixon compared to counties right next to it. So religion is a huge factor in Ohio, and you will see this in 2016 and 2020. Because even back then, this was a big issue in Ohio. Religion really defined the state for decades. And again, JFK's strongest counties were in the northern and more so eastern part of the state, which is where most of the Catholics lived. While Nixon, he performed best in the central, somewhat southern part of the state and the western half, which is more Methodist, Lutheran. I believe the purple one is other, so you get the point though that back then, Ohio was really defined by religion, and 1960 was the perfect election to prove this. JFK ramped the vote shares in Catholic-heavy counties, like Cuyahoga, while Nixon did better Methodist, Lutheran, and non-Catholic counties. This happened nationwide, mostly. You get the point, though. Ohio is the first major factor. Religion is the first major factor into Ohio politics. So we talked about religion, but that's just one factor. The next major factor we can definitely look at is definitely from 1976. It's a split between Appalachia and non-Appalachia part of Ohio. So Ohio realistically, you could split in half. The western and southern half is more Appalachian. This is more rural, working class, white. Eastern half, more so, kind of more suburban, closer to some other Midwestern states, but the more Appalachian part, closer to states like West Virginia, Western Pennsylvania, etc. They're culturally nearly identical. And Jimmy Carter ran up the vote shares in the Appalachian part of the state. This used to be a Democrat stronghold. A lot of these counties, more rural, more white, more working class. And you can see here, there's no defined exact county map for what Appalachia looks like, but this is roughly in line to what it most likely looks like. And you notice half of Ohio is part of Appalachia. And that's where Jimmy Carter performed strongest in. And you're noticing a trend here. The more working class, more rural, etc. was voting more for the Democrats than the Republicans. While the Republicans, of course, run up the vote shares in the more suburban, more urban areas not named Cuyahoga. This is just a fact, and this is the second major divide in the state. Appalachia versus non-Appalachia. That is just, again, another fact based on all the data we do have. Now, the third biggest reason, and for the past couple of years, was one of the biggest reasons for Ohio being a real purple state. So between 1960 and 1976 is really the more so religion divide. While 1976 and 1996, more so the Appalachian versus non-Appalachian regions. Now, 1996, based on this county map, like we said before, very similar to Appalachia. Bill Clinton, the Democrats, performed better in Appalachia, while the Republicans, like Robert Dole, performed best in Cincinnati, Columbus suburbs, etc., the more urban, suburban parts of the state. But the third biggest reason is the suburban, urban, and rural divide. Now, I know this map may be a bit too modern for this, but you get the point. This is roughly in line with what it was 20 years ago. Not exactly, but you get the point. So, you look at a lot of these dark blue counties, right? Means Bob Dole. You notice this orange around Columbus. This is a large fringe metro. This is what you would call basically a suburb. Well, look at how dark these counties are compared to these more rural counties. Fairly dark for Ohio. And down to Cincinnati, very similar thing. Bob Dole did very good in the Cincinnati area. You would think by modern standards, Ohio would be a safe Republican state just from that. But back then, the Democrats had one secret weapon. They ran up the vote shares in the working class rural part of the state. It did pretty good in the parts they didn't win. Now again, Bill Clinton's best county was Mahoning County, Ohio. You better remember this county when we get back to 2016-2020. He got 61% of the vote here. In a very rural county. Fairly rural, fairly working class. Part of Appalachia. This is the prime example of why Ohio is not this pure purple state anymore. And again, there's some suburbs, based on this map, that Bill Clinton did fairly well in. The Cleveland suburbs. But these are more working class suburbs. They're not the traditional Philly suburbs, Cincinnati suburbs. They're working class, blue collar type of people. Again, they're closer culturally than to Western Pennsylvania than they are to Eastern Ohio. Because they're literally right on the border. So, this was the third biggest reason. This is, before 2008, this was one of, if not the biggest reasons for Ohio being this pure purple state. The urban and rural divide was clear. Democrats did very good in the rural and more working class suburban parts of the state. Well, Republicans did better in the more urban, suburban parts of the state. Not everywhere exactly, but compared to today's lens, yeah, they did pretty freaking good. Now again, this was an era that's lasted between 1996 to 2008 for what really made Ohio purple. And remember this, there's to be a fourth and a fifth reason. Now we have our three first three factors. Now there's a fourth factor. Remember, the first factor was religion. Second factor was Appalachian versus non-Appalachian divide. And we still see that to an extent on this map, but not as much as we did previously. The third is urban, suburban, rural. Again, you find this a little bit here. You find a little bit of McCain doing pretty well in the Cincinnati suburbs. Same thing in the Columbus suburbs. But at the same time, he still did respectable enough in the rurals, where this was where the main thing that caused, Ohio to be a purple state wasn't really urban, suburban, rural counties. Instead, it was white working class voters that really defined the state. And you could say this for every election since 1960. But I do believe from 2008 to 2016, and even now, the biggest reason for these voters voting how they are is based on working class, white working class voters. See a lot of this more dark red in this part of the state. Ohio, or I should say Obama, did pretty good in this part of Ohio. While the more educated part of the state, i.e. around the Hamilton County, where Cincinnati is, was more college educated. That's where McCain did fairly well. Cuyahoga, Obama did pretty well here, but there's a fifth factor that when we get to, which kind of defined Ohio for all of these years, you understand, but outside of that, you get a clear vision that McCain was doing way better in the more educated counties than Obama was. Mostly. I mean, McCain was getting 65%, 67%, 60%, 59.2%. Obama, in the more white working class counties, 59.8, 55.5. 49.5, etc. So Obama really defined Ohio's next couple of elections, where working class voters really determined the state, and again, we're still those Democrat voters. But there's one more key thing that you can look back even in 1960 and that really defined how this state is voting. Now we got through the four kind of eras for what influenced Ohio politics. But now we're going to take a look at what really has defined Ohio for all of these years. It wasn't the main factor, but it was a major factor enough where from 1960 to 2020, you could clearly see that one issue basically encompasses Western versus Eastern Ohio. That is coal mining. You see this red blob over Western Ohio, or Eastern Ohio? That's coal mines. You notice that these are the same counties that Democrats have won for years, and Republicans have gotten pathetic numbers here. Sure, they're rural, but they're coal mining country. Coal miners for years were always heavily Democrat. They're always economically populist, but socially conservative. Why is that? Most of them are union workers. And that's a huge part of Eastern Ohio's economy. But then you notice in 2012 that Obama really wasn't getting the numbers that, say, somebody like Bill Clinton would have gotten. You look at the swing map and you notice there's a few counties here that flipped to Obama, or Romney, I should say. You know the biggest reason? This is where the heartland of where all the coal mines are. These counties here, places like Tuckasegee, Jefferson, Belmont, Monroe, these are where a lot of the coal mining operations are. And when Democrats started to take a more anti-coal stance, this is where the swings really started to kick in. Even the trend map indicates, yeah, these counties weren't going away against the Democrats. But even then, Democrats still had solid numbers in Mahoning County, Trumbull County, Portage, Summit, Stark, the more northern working class voters, while the coal mining country swung heavily against Obama. Now that's the five main factors, but we're finally here. Finally to 2012, or 2016, and as you could tell, Trump annihilated Clinton here. And just look at the swing map. Look at where Trump performed the best in. Where he made the biggest gains. Yeah. The parts of this Ohio, Appalachia, working class. usually more Methodist or Catholic part of the state, trended heavy towards Trump. But at the same time, the suburban and urban counties outside of the Cuyahoga region trended left. Places like Warren County, and more so Delaware County, which has been a Republican stronghold for decades. So Trump actually improved in massive margins in the extremely rural part of the state, the working class suburbs part of Ohio, and a lesser extent in the urban parts of the state. And you notice how much he won Ohio by. And mind you, this is when he lost the popular vote by 2 nationwide. So Ohio voted 10 points right of the nation. Now, why is this? Why did all of this happen? Well, let's start with coal once again. Trump, main base in places like Ohio, Central Michigan, and Appalachia as a whole, was coal mining. This was a huge issue for a lot of these people. A lot of these coal mines went out of business because Obama basically forced a lot of these companies that were mining to close. But that doesn't explain this. This is just one part of it. Now again, coal mining, definitely. That's always been an issue for that part of the state. But even more so, look at the northern part of the state. That's even extreme even for Ohio standards, let alone the southeastern part of the state. Well, religion. In 2010, this was a religion map. You notice how the more Methodist part of the state, somewhat central still, but actually moved more eastward. Well, the northern part of the state basically became Old Catholic. The Lutherans got kicked out, essentially. Well, look at the trend map again, and you notice the counties that got way more Catholic or more Methodist swung the heaviest towards Trump. Mostly. There's a few counties down in the Cincinnati area that didn't. But you get the point that the counties that swung the most were either Catholic or more Methodist counties, which they actually shifted eastwards or northern. So it's kind of weird that religion actually played a big impact compared to, for the first time in 60 years. It did play an impact, but not as much as coal. But now you also look at white non-college vote. The highest concentration were the counties that Trump ran the vote in. I mean, look at this. 2012. Okay, it's somewhat blue. Bam, it got even darker. Way darker, in fact. These are ridiculous margins Trump got for even Ohio standards. These working class voters have always been Democrat. They've never voted Republican, a lot of these guys. Even back in Nixon's landslide, even back in Eisenhower's landslide, even Reagan's landslide, Mahoning County was never that close. Trump only lost it by 3, then in 2020, he would win it. This is huge. But also you have the urban and rural divide. Now this map is a bit better to demonstrate this. And again, the yellow counties is both small metros and suburbs. So that's why it's a bit weird with some of the counties. But you get the point. The counties like right next to Delaware, right next to, Franklin County, yeah, they trended somewhat away from Trump. Even though some of them actually swung heavy towards Trump. And same thing in Cincinnati. It's somewhat trended away for Trump. But the more small metro exurban part of the state swung heavy for Trump. And folks, this is just one election. This happened in just one election, not multiple cycles. Sure, it was building up. The rage was building up against the establishment. But this should have took, 2, 3 elections for this to happen. This isn't supposed to happen in a swing state like Ohio that has all these factors. I mean, you would think Democrats or the left would be able to capitalize on one of these. I mean, these are 4 to 5 different things that they could capitalize on. They lost their Appalachian support. The western part of Ohio still got Republican, while the eastern part became a solid Republican stronghold. So that even doesn't help them. Coal, that's a big reason for that swings. Same thing for religion. The Methodists actually moved eastward I know it's weird, but that's what happened, and Lutherans got kicked out. Same thing for white working class voters. You would think, especially around the Cincinnati and Columbus areas, even the Cuyahoga areas, these swings wouldn't be as massive as they are. They still are pretty big. And also, again, small metro, urban, rural. You would think that Democrats would be able to do somewhat better than they did. And this is just pathetic numbers that Democrats got in the state of Ohio. Now, what is my final verdict for Ohio? I think it's quite obvious. You have 4 factors, even 5 actually, playing for Trump. And let's go to 2020, just to show you guys how well that went for Democrats. They're going to win back Ohio. Yeah, it got even more Republican. The southern part in particular got more Republican somehow. And that's mostly because I do think there's mostly a religion. You got a high amount of Methodists down here that still voted, or Baptists, that still voted against Trump, but I think a lot of them that always still voted Democrat, they finally bailed on the Democratic Party. So folks, it's safe Republican. It's not going to be close for decades. You got all of these factors against the Democrats. They don't have a single thing going for them in Ohio. Sure, Delaware County trended like 5 points. Whoop-de-doo. Delaware County only has 120,000 votes. And Franklin County, you're maxed out there. Hamilton County, you're practically maxed out there. And you look at these northern counties, these counties, like Mahoning County, Trumbull County, Portage, they're going to vote 60-70% Republican. A place like Summit's going to flip eventually. Cuyahoga is going to continuously get closer and closer. This is just a disaster for the Democrats, and this just demonstrates the long haul of Ohio's turning Republican. It's not the purple state it once was. Even with all the factors staying the same, it's just the Democrats moved too far left on too many issues. Hope you guys enjoyed this documentary. If you guys did, smash the like button down below, subscribe, share with your friends, hit that little bell, and yes. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.